Hey, it's Sam from Sugar Spun Run, and today we are making peppermint bark cupcakes. All right, sneaking this recipe in just before the holidays, but today's cupcake recipe can obviously be enjoyed anytime. These are a fun wintry cupcake. They are filled with chocolate ganache and topped with a white chocolate peppermint frosting. I think you're going to love them. Let's get started. Get your oven preheating to 350 degrees Fahrenheit. The cupcake batter for today's recipe all comes together in one bowl, which is really nice because we're going to have to dirty a couple more bowls to make the ganache filling and the frosting. But for starters, you're just going to need a large mixing bowl, and to this we're going to add 1 3/4 cup or 218 grams of all-purpose flour, along with 1 cup of granulated sugar, and that's 200 grams, and 1 cup or 200 grams of firmly packed light brown sugar. Now for the cocoa powder for today's recipe, we are going to be using a dark cocoa powder. This is typically sold in the grocery stores right next to your regular cocoa powder. Hershey's makes a brand that I like and that I'm using today. This is 3/4 cup or 75 grams. We'll also add 2 tablespoons of cornstarch. This will help give them some structure. We'll also add 1.5 teaspoons of baking soda, and then just 3/4 teaspoon of table salt. All right, we'll go ahead and stir everything together. You want to make sure you get that brown sugar mixed up so there are no clumps remaining. Firmly packing the brown sugar will also help break out any clumps in the brown sugar, which is why I recommend firmly packing it, even if you are using a scale to measure your sugar instead of a measuring cup, which really everyone should be using a scale. It just makes your life so much easier. All right, next up we need our oil. So I actually like to use a blend of butter and oil for this recipe. We're going to use a 1/2 cup or 113 grams of melted butter. And mine has almost started to re-solidify at this point, but it's okay if yours is hot. A lot of times I'll tell you that your melted butter needs to cool down. It's totally fine if yours is still pretty warm. Now, in addition to the butter, we're going to be adding a 1/2 cup or 118 milliliters of a neutral cooking oil. I love using avocado oil, that's what I'm using today, but classic vegetable oil or canola oil would also work. Go ahead and add this. And then I'm going to stir everything together until all of the dry ingredients are moistened. This can get pretty dry and it can feel a bit like a dough, especially since my butter was a little cooler than I generally like it to be. So if you have any trouble mixing it together, just switch over to your stand mixer or your hand mixer. I should mention that today's recipe can totally be made in a stand mixer with a paddle attachment, but today I'm just going to be doing a lot of it by hand with a little help from my electric hand mixer. All right, and this is a bit dry, like I said, because of my butter, so let's give it a quick mix. All right, next up, our eggs. So ideally, you really should use room temperature eggs for today's recipe. If your eggs are too cold, they can kind of shock the batter and make it not come together properly, which is a giant pain, and sometimes you even have to start over. So we're using 2 whole eggs. I'm gonna go ahead and crack these separately. It's a store-bought egg right there. Chickens are slacking because the weather's getting cold. All right, so 2 large eggs, but that's not all. We're also going to add an egg yolk. So crack this in a separate dish. We'll shake off that egg white. Oh, one good way to use up extra egg whites, you can use this to make candied almonds or candied walnuts. I have recipes for both of those on the blog. I think I even have videos for them, but if you don't want to waste your egg whites, great way to use them. All right, for a little bit of extra flavor, we're going to be adding some vanilla extract. If I can get my vanilla bottle open, we'll do 2 teaspoons of vanilla right with the eggs. I love my homemade vanilla. I don't know if you can see this on the camera, but I've got all those, little extra vanilla. But we've got all of those little black specks from the vanilla beans. Oh, so much flavor. All right, let's stir everything together and just do this on low speed until you get everything combined. With a lot of cake recipes, you have to worry about accidentally overmixing the batter. The method we're using here is sort of a reverse creaming method. With this method, you don't really have to worry about accidentally overmixing things. It's actually pretty hard to do. Okay, once everything's mixed together, we're going to add our buttermilk. You need 1 cup of buttermilk. I do usually set this out in advance so it can come to room temperature, and we'll stir this in. Our last ingredient for today's recipe is 1/2 cup, or at least for the cupcake portion, 1/2 cup of hot water. This should be very hot, boiling or steaming water. Be careful with it, don't burn yourself. So I'm going to stir this carefully into the batter. If the water looks a little dirty, it's because I just used my oil cup. And The reason we are using hot water is because it's going to help bloom the cocoa. It's going to give us a really nice depth of flavor. You could alternatively use hot coffee. That would work really well, and it shouldn't make your cupcakes taste like coffee. It's just going to also help enhance that chocolate flavor. So let me stir this in, and after we stir in the water, we are going to scrape the sides and bottom of the bowl because we want a nice uniform batter. We don't want any lumps in here. It can be a little tricky. And this especially applies if you're using a stand mixer. I find that sometimes at the very bottom of the bowl, little pockets of thicker batter like to hide. All right, one more mix. I'm pretty happy with how this is looking, so we can grab our cupcake pans. Today's recipe makes 24 cupcakes, and I usually do bake the trays just one at a time, just because I find my oven doesn't always bake super evenly if I put them all in at once, so it's fine for one to sit on the counter. The easiest way to get your batter into a cupcake pan without making a mess, or at least without making a huge mess, is to use an ice cream scoop, or I love this large cookie scoop that I've been using for my gourmet cookies. Works very well. We're going to fill the cupcake liners 2/3 of the way full, no more full than that. Otherwise they could overflow and then cave in on themselves, which is just tragic. You know, a lot of times you're inclined to want to fill things up all the way. You think you're going to get a bigger cupcake. Doesn't always work that way. Sorry, we had a rat lurking on the floor over there. How's it going, buddy? Yeah? All right. So again, I'll fill up that cupcake pan in just a minute, but we're going to bake these one at a time, center rack of our 350 Fahrenheit, 175 Celsius oven, and they usually need to bake for about 18 minutes. As with most cupcakes, you're going to want to use the toothpick test to tell that they're finished baking. Just insert a toothpick into the center of a cupcake, and when you pull it out, it should be clean or preferably have a few moist crumbs on it, but there shouldn't be any wet batter. These cupcakes are going to need to cool completely before you can fill them with ganache and before you can add the frosting, but I like to let them cool in the cupcake pan for no more than 5 minutes, and then I will carefully remove them from the cupcake pan and move them to a cooling rack to cool completely. I do like to remove them because if they sit in the pan for too long, some moisture can get trapped and the cupcake liners can get a little bit soggy. So we just gently remove them and then you won't run into that problem. These are a pretty delicate cupcake though, so you do want to be careful. Well, they're delicate when they're warm anyway. So once these have had some time to cool, we can go ahead and make our ganache filling. So let's do that. So for the ganache filling, this comes together very, very easily. So easily you can do it holding a baby. While you could certainly make it, you know, the traditional way on the stovetop where you pour heated cream or steaming cream over the chocolate, we're just gonna do it in the microwave. So you'll need 6 ounces of a semi-sweet or dark chocolate. I'm using a cup of semi-sweet chocolate chips, but chopping a chocolate bar would work probably even better. That's just a better quality chocolate. So I have this in a microwave safe bowl, and I'm going to add a 1/2 cup or 118 milliliters of heavy cream. And I'm just going to give this like a gentle little stir, take it over to the microwave, and I'll heat it in like 20-25 second intervals, stirring really well in between until this is nice and smooth and glossy. Already melting. So once it starts to get melty, I will switch to a whisk, if I can find my whisk, and that'll just help it come together a little better. And a lot of times it looks a little bit separated or piecey just before it comes together. All right, let's take a look at our ganache. Smooth, glossy, completely melted. We are going to let this cool a bit before we put it in our cupcakes because I want it to, it's not gonna completely hold its shape, but I don't want it to just kind of get absorbed into the cupcake. So we're going to let this sit for like 10 or 15 minutes and then we'll be back. One of us will be back. All right, next up is our white chocolate peppermint frosting. Because as you know, peppermint bark has to have those few essential layers. You need that rich chocolate, in this case dark chocolate, and you need that peppermint white chocolate. So both the peppermint and white chocolate come into play with this frosting. And we're going to be starting with 6 ounces, which I believe is 170 grams of white chocolate. So I took a white chocolate baking bar and I chopped this up into small pieces and I melted it in my microwave in like 15-20 second intervals. Anytime you're melting chocolate, you want to make sure you pause frequently and stir well. Otherwise, you run the risk of seizing it. If you've ever had chocolate that's like lumpy and separated, it's seized, unfortunately, and it's not easy to come back from that. So after you melt your chocolate, you're going to want to let it sit at room temperature until it's no longer warm to the touch. So mine's been sitting for about probably 10-12 minutes or so. How long it takes is going to depend on your kitchen. So this is ready to go. So we'll set that aside and then we're going to grab our butter. You need 1 cup of softened unsalted butter. Just going to add this right into a large mixing bowl. Then I'm going to use my electric mixer to beat the butter until it's smooth and creamy. And once again, you could use a stand mixer for this, but I just like to use my hand mixer. And it's cold in my kitchen these days, so it's taking a lot longer for my butter to soften as much as I want it to. All right, once that butter is well creamed, we're going to add our white chocolate right into the bowl. Again, it's so important that this not be hot, otherwise it'll melt the butter and you'll have a greasy frosting. It's also important that your butter not be cold, or it could kind of shock the frosting, and then you could have little bits of hardened chocolate in there. If you successfully creamed your butter, though, you're probably not going to run into that issue. Let's go ahead and mix this into our butter. Okay. I'm just going to pause briefly, scrape the sides and bottom of the bowl. I want to make sure everything is well combined and creamy, and it is. So we can add our sugar. So even though this is a white chocolate frosting, and white chocolate can tend to be a little bit oversweet, one of the things I love about this frosting is it's not super sweet. We are only going to be using 2 cups of powdered sugar for the whole frosting. That's for 24 cupcakes. And most of my frostings use like 4 cups of sugar for that number of cupcakes. So this is a pretty well balanced in terms of sweetness. So I'm just gonna add the frosting in like 2 or 3 parts, or sugar in 2 parts. Add the sugar to the frosting. Keep your mixer on low speed, that way you don't end up wearing the sugar. It's hard to have patience. Just want the frosting made, you know? I'm ready to eat it. Okay, so next we're going to add our flavoring. So I like to add just a pinch of salt, like an 1/8 teaspoon of salt. If you used salted butter, you can skip the salt addition. We're also going to add a 1/2 teaspoon of vanilla extract. We're also going to be adding peppermint extract, but the vanilla really adds a nice depth of flavor, so I do use both. So half that, and then a teaspoon of peppermint extract. You can always taste this after you've added the peppermint extract. I already have this measured out. And if it's not strong enough for you, you can add a little bit more, but peppermint extract is pretty strong. I also want to note that I am using peppermint extract and not mint extract. Mint extract is a lot more spearminty, and we want a true peppermint flavor. So let me stir everything together. All right, now I am going to pause real quickly and scrape the sides and bottom of the bowl. Make sure everything's well incorporated. And then I usually whip some cream into this frosting. So I have 2 tablespoons of heavy whipping cream right here. The frosting's looking pretty good, so I'm probably only going to add a tablespoon, but we'll take a look and see. So I'm going to add a tablespoon of cream for now, and then I'm going to stir this together on slow speed, increase speed to high, and then whip it for a couple seconds until it's a little bit fluffier. What the heck, let's add the next tablespoon. All right, let's take a look. It's light, it's creamy. We are in good shape. So I'm just going to put this in a piping bag, and then we'll decorate our cupcakes. All right, assembling these cupcakes is pretty easy, and you don't need any fancy tools. We are just gonna take our cupcake, take a knife like a paring knife, and we're going to cut a hole in it that's about 1 inch deep and about 1 inch in diameter, and then make the hole more narrow at the bottom. And then you should be able to just gently pop this right out of the cupcake. So you have a nice little indent in there. Of course, you don't want to go all the way to the bottom. That will damage the structural integrity of your cupcake. And then we can fill this with our ganache. I'm just using another little cookie scoop. The ganache shouldn't be too warm. This is a nice temperature. And I'm just going to fill that up to the top, or almost the top, just a little under the top. And then take this little piece of cake, and we are just going to kind of cut off the bottom of it. You just have like a thin piece right here, and pop that right back over the cupcake. And then you're good to add your frosting. Add a few candy canes on top. Do crushed small pieces. If the pieces are too big, they'll be like chewy and not a good experience. You want like a peppermint dust. And that is it. That is how you make these peppermint bark cupcakes. Ideally, you should let that ganache solidify all the way before you bite into it, because it's going to just kind of be messy while it's still liquid. But pretty straightforward. I hope you enjoyed this recipe. Let me know if you're making them for Christmas this year. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you next time. This is gonna be a mess because the ganache has not solidified. So I'm gonna use a fork to not embarrass myself. Maybe I should have taken a smaller bite. That was amazing. I think you're gonna like this one. What do you think, Ella? She's not impressed. She wants a cupcake. Where are you going? She says, I'm over it. If I can't have any chocolate, I'm out. Where are you going? She's like, I don't want to be on camera. I'm glad you think it's funny.